I am Andrius Kulikauskas. This is Math for Wisdom cohort around Montijn van Loo. And we're going to have two parts today. In the first part, we'll have a discussion on how to live, and I'll lead that. And then Montijn will give us a further presentation of formology. So we all wrote letters on how to live, and they were very helpful. I was just saying, Steph's was very nice because he took that question, how to live, he kind of said it in his own words about, the game that we're playing, right? And so what I'd like to do with all four of us is to, we've written about how to live, we can re-say that, but to connect, to pull together. How would you pull together the things that you've heard from us and collect it together? And I'll have each of us say that, and then I'll try to show the themes that I see towards building a culture. So who'd like to start? Montaigne, do you want to?
I was actually saying for the second half, I was actually planning to go into how to live as well.
Mhm.
So not about formology. Formology can serve as a formalization of that aspect, but I was planning to go into how to live as well in the second part more elaborately. So we can perhaps save mine for the second part.
Yeah, okay, so you're welcome to jump in, but we'll have in mind that you'll play this role of the mastermind who can, who can present your theory, but also connect to everybody else. So you'll be listening
Absolutely. Yeah.
very intensely. Okay, so who'd like to start?
Let me jump in here.
Thank you, Jerry.
The interesting question I see in terms of how we all pull together, is why are we investigating? Why are we doing this in the first place?
Mhm.
Um, and I think it comes back down to generating some sort of application, because we're generating words and ideas and models and what have you. But what is the real purpose of that? Why are we living? Why are we doing this kind of investigation? And I think it comes for me down to um, we're just trying to help. We're trying to make things better for everyone. And this comes back to the notion of application. How do these ideas really get applied? And it comes back to, the way we live, and then how you tie that back into mathematics in a certain sense. When you get up in the morning and you go to the bathroom and you get breakfast and stuff, how do you use math? How do you use numbers? Maybe you use numbers by saying, what time of day is it? If you're going to cook breakfast, you're going to have that. If you're going to go shopping, you use numbers for money. If you watch sports, you're going to use numbers for keeping score, those kinds of things. But that's that's just counting numbers pretty much. And then how do you use real mathematics? And I think that's the key here. I see that fundamental issue as being we use mathematics in the sense of a quaternion, which I think is the basis of language. So this all, piles together then in terms of how do we pull together? How do we focus on what we're really trying to do and the similarities I call well, synchronicities or symmetries, how each of our lives are running in parallel in a certain sense, and that we're trying to do something, we're trying to make a difference. Uh, so that's kind of where I see it's going, and I think this is terrific. I love it so far. So
Thank you, Jerry. Alex, would you? Oh, oh,
you had
that's
to
too
ditch
bad.
out.
Alex had to go. Okay. Uh, Steph, then.
Yeah, I felt ready to write what I just did, so I'm not sure if everybody got to read it, but um,
Maybe we'll ask, Montaigne read it, right? Did you read what Steph wrote? And Jerry, did you read it, what Steph wrote?
earlier
Was
today.
that recently? I read what he wrote before. Was that just today?
Just an hour ago or so, he
Oh
wrote.
no, I haven't had a chance to look at that.
Okay, then why don't you summarize? And then it was a very articulate letter.
Okay. Yeah, how to live to me is kind of like another prompt or a question is what game are we playing? When I reread that, maybe I should have said which game are we playing?
Mhm.
Um, I I like games, and I like James Cars's infinite, finite and infinite games for kind of establishing how to, what are the rules defining a particular game. And
Mhm.
these are abstract games, but Jerry, your question, or the question that brought that had Andrius bring us together, to me is kind of like, what is the collective game that we're playing here together? And at least Jerry, from your email, I found really helpful, and you were saying universal models or U models. It was kind of like a game to me for us to all um, play play your model out loud in front of each other so that one can learn from another and see the structures, and then also get the right feedback from people who have been playing this way for a while, who have developed certain concepts and structures and mathematics and languages. And so that's why I think Andrews was has been indicating that um, is kind of, we can make a culture around. And so for me, I'm going to try and play my game out loud so that one can see the structure and give feedback so that I can play my game better.
Yeah, that was very, very helpful. I have a lot to say about that. Montaigne, do you want to jump in here? Do you have some, do you want to jump in?
Yes, yeah, but perhaps like just to like for me, if you answer how to live, it really feels that there are like two main approaches to answer that, and then in each approach against the sub branches again, and I could try to like describe how I do it and also how Jerry and Steph fit in. But if I want to
Why
do
don't you
that,
do that? You'll be able to go in more detail later, but if you could do a summary now, very good, please.
yeah, I think also what Jerry said, and also I think what Steph too, is to also it has a descriptive element to how to live, about just what is going on, how do we even talk about living, and how do we even get structure in that. So for Jerry, I think that is with his U models, and then within that U models, you say something normative about you're trying to help, and then how do you help? And then you say, well, you have to really ask yourself, what is the situation, to get grip on that. And then I think Jerry says, well, we can use mathematics to formalize and structure our understanding of the world, which best helps us understand where have to go next. And I really did think that also fits in with what Jerry says of his wife's poem, Bloom Where You Are Planted, because you first have to know where you are planted to know how to best grow. So you really see there's this dichotomy between what situation where you are planted, and then given that situation, where to go next. And then where you are planted, well, we can structurize that using mathematics. So I really see, and I think that's also really the spirit of what I'm going to say. But what I would like to do is, I do take a different approach in answering that, in perhaps more formalism and a different way. But yeah, I think like in terms of feeling, I think we already agree the essence, and I think it's the same game with Steph. Um, I think he really also really stresses, while perhaps Jerry stresses more about using mathematics to get to know the situation. I think Steph already also really expresses a lot of you have to not only be on yourself to know the situation, but really confront with others to get more grip on the situation. So perhaps what Jerry seems to embody more the beauty of truth, what situation, and I'm willing to kill my ego to get to really know the facts of the state. I feel that Steffi seems to be embracing more the beauty of us, really saying, okay, I want to get to know the perspectives of all the other peoples, because that should also be integrated into the situation. And I think that's really, yeah, well, I agree with both the beauty of truth, beauty of us, and I think each one of you also agree with them. So I really see already this, we already agree the essence. It's just that I have, of course, my own vocabulary. Um, so I think in terms of just the relations, I think we agree, yeah. And I think, well, we can structurize this response and really bracket and categorize them, the poetical response, analytical approach, blah 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 blah. But I think for now, yeah, I think I really agree with what has been said.
And so when you say will to beauty, you mean combining that beauty of truth, which you see as yourself, but you also see beauty of us. You see through others, I guess more generally. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm quite strict on what I really mean with these terms. So when I say will to
Sure.
beauty, it's just a descriptive claims of how people navigate moral decision making.
Hmm.
So it's really just descriptive. People, this everybody applies to it. If you are engaging in moral decision making, you
Hmm.
are essentially creating narration stories, and you are committing to the most beautiful one. Uh, that's just a description. And then what are moral decision making? Well, we can have a whole bottom up approach to get to that point. Will to our true beauty is essentially a normative claim, which only says that if you see the beauty of us and you see the beauty of truth, then that should lead to certain rules, the rule to care and the rule of doubt, respectively, and that then engages that cycle of death of ego, rebirth of beauty, and what that process is will to our true beauty. So that's just the normative claim, the normative claim. So we really have this descriptive claim, will to beauty, and the normative claim. It says if these two insights, then this kind of attitudes in life, and that's then the normative claim. So I tend to keep them separated.
And so I really appreciate the summary, and then you'll be able to go in more detail later. So I'm just very grateful. This is where I've wanted to be, to have this little nucleus for this culture where we're all playing a role. And um, I think it's just evident for me everyone is contributing something, their talents, basically. So I was really impressed with Steph's letter, how articulate that was, saying things that I think, yeah, that's exactly what I would want to say, but saying it in a way that's maybe much more accessible, or at least going to be more accessible to other people, because it's just kind of more to the point. Like, so letting go of my private language, right, or my personal, and say, no, this is a very helpful way to say it. And then to bring in things like soccer, so for example, to say, hey, soccer. So all of a sudden, I know that you love soccer and that it means so much to you. But now it kind of like is much more, it registers much more. Okay, how I could be thinking about it. So I think some of the points I want to bring out in terms of this game of games, let's say. So it's this culture is and I'll just have to maybe say them kind of randomly because they're coming up. But we're kind of like, so just like Steph was saying, we're all game players, and this is a game where you are able to play by yourself. You see, and in fact, you have to be able to play by yourself in order to get it. So you have to be an independent thinker. And the problem in our society is that we have people who do not know how to occupy themselves, but they're in charge, right? So they're making all this noise and all this attention. So we're the silent network to say, look, we know how to occupy ourselves and we can see that in each other. So that's like part of the game. Now, we all have different languages. So to be able to say the same thing in different languages should be normal for us. There's not going to be like the way to say it, right? There's going to be nice ways to say it, good ways to say it. Different ways will hit with different people. So we learn that since it's not about any particular words, it's something deeper than words. It's about structure. So I see like Steph is using this whether, what, how, why, and I just think it's great to say, whether that could justify itself or not, but to say, oh, this is a, or I look at, I listen to Montaigne, you can see, and this is a great strength of Montaigne, this is why I'm kind of focusing on him. You just see the elaborateness of the structure, but that it's very well felt out, right? So to feel out the structure, like why are all these things here intuitively, just like you would in soccer, you have different concepts, offense versus defense, when you're on offense and when you're in defense intuitively, right? So like Jerry has enormous intuition, I think. And so like when he speaks about his wife or about himself, these different ways of thinking, right? So to go back to Montaigne, like in this type of ethical process, when we learn each other's words, we can start to tease out the structure a little bit better. So to create a story, like which mind is creating the story? Well, I think it's the second mind, like the mathematical mind is constructing different, it's the constructing mind. But then to choose which one's most beautiful, it's the first one that feels, oh, this is a beautiful story. This story feels very nice, right? So one mind may be doing the construction, another mind may be doing the evaluation, the appreciation. The third mind to say, hey, I'm going to commit to this. This is something that I can commit to, you see. So that's just like, that's what we're kind of looking for, how to look at these things and try to take what we have and then define it more structurally, precisely, etc. Keep working on that. Another thing, and Alex isn't here. I think maybe he's having to go to work or something, or with family or whatever. Something came up, but he wrote letter, and there was intuition about that. It's kind of like, well, he's grappled with these things, but somehow they almost seem impossible. Like it's impossible to be able to know how to live, right? Because it's impossible to know like why we're here, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'll give a link, I'll write a letter, but he gave a very nice talk to, who is it? Michael Levin, one of the greatest thinkers alive, I think. So he's a biologist, and so he has this academy, and so Alex gave an hour long, half-hour talk, half-hour discussion with him. It went very well. But see, so Alex said something the opposite to what he wrote. He said, well, Alex was saying in this video, he was saying, well, suppose that there's a bigger game going on, something like there's something bigger going on. Like maybe you're a cell in a body, but then you start to realize, hey, but I'm in a body, or maybe you're an athlete. You realize, hey, I'm in a soccer game, right? Like, how can you figure out what's the game, the bigger point of view that you're in, and then how can you play it out? Well, I have a lot of experience in, so this idea of imagining God, right? Imagining God, imagining what would be God's point of view, and then trying to play with that and trying to say, then what would God want from me and how would I fit in? It's all imaginary. But the idea is that our imaginations may be very limited. There may not be that, and that's the beauty of like when we start to do this culture together, we'll see repeated themes. It will see we're so different, our talents are so different, our deepest values are so different, our relationship with truth. But when things repeat, then we, like for example, with the relationship with truth, we say, oh, they're all about correspondence, let's say between those two minds, the content and the form. But you can make that correspondence all over the place, and everyone does. So this idea to say to someone like Alex, to say, hey, okay, there's reason to be negative about this idea that we don't know why we're here, we can't figure it out. On the other hand, that's a starting point. That's not a conclusion. So why don't we, and that we will never, 100% always know. That'll always be a new question. We'll always go back to that. We'll always say, okay, let's start from scratch. But we can go a long, long ways, I think I have, and I'd like to go with others that way to say, look, I can only imagine this one way. Like, can you only imagine this one way? Like the only thing I can think of motivating God would be this thing like, well, is God necessary? Would God be if God was not? And you get this whole thing coming out. Now, if someone else can imagine another kind of God and can imagine another kind of thing, okay. And I'm not saying it has to be that way. I'm just saying my imagination leads me in that one direction, you see. So that's, I think, so to sum up, maybe when we're doing exactly what Steph said, what we get to do is we get to say, okay, is it true that every single one of us is kind of playing the same game? Okay. Is it really true? And maybe this is another thing I want to add, like, and this relates also to what Montain's been saying. As I wrote in my letter, like when you're in different circumstances, making different comparisons, different things are relevant. So if it's about me against the world, well, the fact that I have my independence is much more important than whatever the world would force me to do. It cannot force me to, it can't force me what my attitude is going to be. I'm going to choose my attitude, right? So that's the first thing. However, and so but if I have to say, look, we're really all the same person in different circumstances. And in the end, my personality or that's beautiful. We all have our personality. We all have our sense of beauty. We all have our certain circumstances. But again, I want to believe that if I was Montaigne, I'd be Montaigne. If I was Steph, I'd be Steph, because we're the same person in different circumstances. But then I want to say this Jesus who lives in all the people, or Buddha, or whoever, Martin Luther King, whoever it is that lives in all the people, they realize that there's a God that's bigger than them, that's not bounded, that's not conditional, that doesn't have to be good. We want to be good, we have to be good. So trying to sort out these basics. Steph and then Montaigne. Yes,
Oh,
Steph?
yeah, no.
I just wanted to, you, Andrews, have gone to a depth where I've not even, my imagination hasn't gone to.
Mhm.
And so you're revealing a structure of a game that I've not played. Like I'm not playing down there. And because it's very confusing down, I call it down there, or maybe it's up there, but it's confusing. But what you've done is you have assistance, you have tools, you have math, you have structure that you can talk about it in a consistent way. So
Mhm.
what I hear you saying is just when I open the imagination, I'm led in this route. I have ways of speaking about it. And maybe you don't know that other people don't explore that space. I'm sure you've come to the conclusion that most people are not. But especially for myself, as somebody who does think about some of these things, I've never really gotten there, and I've never really had any ways of standing on some concrete foundations there. So that's what I appreciate from your point of view is giving structure to some of that. So I think it's worth hearing and standing on and learning more about. So that's all I wanted to say.
I really appreciate that. Montaigne.
Yeah, I was just maybe you didn't see the hand of Steph. I was just doing that, so I didn't have anything to say myself.
Okay. And so uh just kind of wrapping it up, and I'll be handing it over to Montaigne. Maybe I'll ask Jerry to, share some more thoughts. But the point, and I think like we're learning to play alongside each other. We're all players. No one can play for us. We each have our responsibility. There's something very godly about that, right? Like we all have some role in this God's question, like, is God necessary or not? So in the end, it'll kind of lead to that. We all have in this culture, and I think this can be whatever, but Jerry and I call it the Econet culture. He and I, we've kind of led that. It's based on his ecological interests, but the idea is that this may be a way to just kind of engage everybody to say, look, we all share the planet. We all share. We can all be ecological thinkers and ecological doers, right? So that's just so I'll be engaging us about that. But what are the minimal commitments for this game? Or like what are the minimal aspects for this culture? So like AA has their rules, scouting has their rules, everybody. But I think like this, for example, that notion of prayer, to say, look, like we all accept the big picture. So like in the Econet culture, I think I've told Steph, and Jerry certainly knows, to say to be willing to spend an hour a month thinking about the big picture. What does it look like from the big picture? See, so is that a huge request? But like, isn't that what life's all about in the end? Like trying to know, like, and you can do it or not, but to say that should be normal, right? That should be like expected. We all know what the big picture is in some sense, right? For us, right? So to end with a prayer to say, look, we're tuning into that big picture. We're not saying we know anything, and it means so much to that we can tune in, that we can care, etc. And so that opens up, like when Montai talks about neurotheology or whatever, like it's like, well, whatever that means, but there's a room for that, right? Like because it's obviously important. And then to go maybe back to Jerry's question, why are we investigating? If that three minds type of thing makes sense, you see, one how to live is to say, well, it's the why, mind. So that there's the what mind, the how mind, the why mind, but it's the why mind, the investigatory mind, which is where we should be coming from, the big picture mind. So when we're investigating, well, God is an investigator, you see. So that's when we're really like in the godly type of situation. Now that may be very biased, but there's a biased culture. Like that's the bias we would choose to say, look, we're all investigating, is godly to investigate, that makes God real. And just sitting there, not knowing anything, being stupid, just, bringing it all back, reconstructing everything, re-enjoying the beauty, something like that's where we can find shared value. So I think all of this is just to say, like, if we're doing what we're doing, we get to have a shared game and we get to learn how to talk about it. Maybe, Jerry, do you have something to add to this?
Yeah, I do. Let me comment on that. When I first started interacting with Andrius, there were a number of things that struck me. There was a lot that I saw that was common, I agreed on, but there were other things that struck me as peculiar. I have always tended to build myself as an atheist and an anarchist. And so to interact with somebody who was deeply committed in interacting with God was perplexing to me in a way. But I am very much at peace with it because I do have this belief in a universal consciousness that we as conscious entities all can interact, and interacting conscious entities can be conscious itself. So there would be a logical extension to a universal consciousness. So that might be what I think is sort of like what Andreas views as God and how the interaction goes. But it's the question of language and how that goes. While I've always maintained sort of that I was an atheist, a lot of other people have expressed the belief that I was a deeply religious person, which always struck me as probably right. But again, it gets into the language of how you deal with this. So it's comes back to giving each other space and checking with how we are using language, what we mean with that. And I'm very comfortable working with Andreas and what have you. I don't completely understand how he is communicating with God in his sense, but I appreciate it. I respect it. I see similarities, and I think it's very valuable as to how we go forward. So I just
And
comment on it that way.
and to hear that comment, and then to remember, I think when we spoke last, you and I think you also made some comment that God made much more sense to you, or somehow, like something made. And I just want to add, if someone as mature as yourself, like he was an elder to me, and who is already an old man, like, so
That's
uh,
me.
yeah. So I think if a person can make a 2% change in their life, that's like a 50% change. Okay. So that's a huge privilege to see that, to do that. And then so I just want to say, and like I think, like, for all of us, like, we are who we are. We shouldn't have to be changing very much. But the idea is that, but we we could be a little flexible, like a 2% change maybe is actually a good thing, for us to say, like, are we willing to change 2%, let's say,
Yeah.
right? I'm Steph,
Are you
your last
saying that?
comments, and then we'll go over to Montaigne. Last comments.
Are you saying the 2% change is like 50% because it's compound growth, or uh, what do
Well, it's
you?
just it just comes from my friend Shu Hong. Used to have like Bible studies. There's this whole Chinese student Christian movement in the U.S., but a lot of the parents come to watch their grandchildren, and they're all atheists, you see, and they're old people. So you would have special meetings for these old people. And so someone like that just to become, who's a Communist Party member, to become interested in the Bible, something like, well, whatever they believe, but just like it's a 2% change. But it's like in their life, the fact that it means that they are alive, that they're growing forever, learning forever, living forever, right? If you know so much in your life, but you're still making these radical, you know, flexible changes, I think that means you're alive in an eternal sense, right? And so maybe to say this is a huge thing to be able to work together, and so why can't I be open to other people and what works, and to seize that. And so when we can take on those, if we see those opportunities.
I'm
Man, I'll
just
take a
wondering.
1 minute break, and then Montaigne will lead us. So I'll be back in 1 minute.
I got a follow-up question for Andrews, though. Hopefully, he can answer it within a minute when he's back.
Yeah.
Montaigne, I do appreciate, I guess, the structure that you have, that you're sharing, because you are precise with your words, and I appreciate that. You're intentional with your words. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, I will actually also go into that. Just that I myself have been using this notion of like the analyst, and the poet, just how they interact and deal with each other for a long time. And I also would like to like apply that to how to live, because I do have a poet in me, I do have an analyst in me, and I think everybody of us has that. So yeah, it's really like this. The analyst wants to go to the destination of the answers, and the poet just wants to enjoy the journey and just to see the beauty of all of it. So it was really interesting. Which thank you. Um,
Andrews, I know you want to kick it to Montaigne, because I just want a follow-up question on the 2%, 50%. I'm just wondering if in our own conversation we can expand on this. But you know how you were speaking about the lens and the knowledge gained, and
Hmm.
the difference in the size of entropy
Hmm.
gained versus the probability. Like, could you see the 2% being a a more significant change in that relationship between,
Well, the thing that comes to mind in that is like a 2% change in the knowledge lens could give you hugely different results. Like
right? That's
30%
where I'm
difference in
picking.
terms of how it all fits together because it depending on where things are, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, Montaigne, thank you for your patience. We're ready for you.
Yes. All right. I will just also try to do a screen share, just to let's see, this should work. And then I want to see you guys as well. Do I get to know that? Yes. Does everybody see the screen?
Hmm.
All right. Um, Yeah, so I will just draw a little bit while doing talking. So indeed, the question is how to live. And essentially, this is the major part for the second part of my own work. And I would like just to give how I treat this question and then how to relate the others which have been stated here, even though I already gave a little bit of ideas of how how I see the relationship between your ideas and my ideas. Um, and maybe just to start off, generally in terms of how we deal with question and answers, I think I feel like there's like a poetical approach generally and a more analytical approach, whereas the poet just really just seems to enjoy just the journey of questioning and answering these kind of big questions. The analyst really tries to find the answer. So whereas the poet embraces diversity of answers, the analyst wishes to seek only out one kind of answer. Um, and I wish to really like start with like first the poetical answer, and I would like to use essentially what Jerry has proposed of his wife, "Bloom where you are planted." I think it's a very beautiful poetical answer, and I hope that at the end of this meeting, we will be able to come back to this quote again and see how an analytical answer can be seen as interpretation of that poem, because I think that's generally of a quote, because I think that's generally how it is with these beautiful poetical quotes. They admit a lot of interpretations, and I think there's also beauty in finding an analytical interpretation of that quote, where you can really say, well, that's what I really, really, really mean, to also satisfy the analyst in us. Um, so yeah, so how to live, yeah, you can answer as a poet, and then you can say bloom where you are planted. But if you take the analytical approach, well, then we really have to go with rigorous categorizations of how to even treat this kind of question. And I would propose that there are generally two ways or one can answer that question. One will be the descriptive road, which really asked how, that should be like this, how does life live? And the normative approach, a normative road, how should life live? So, and I think generally speaking, these two follow one another. So most of the times when people want to go to how should life live, like how should we live, they first build, the structure. Okay, what's even going on? How do you even go about talking about these things with this descriptive road? Um, so essentially, at the end of the descriptive road, we will get to the answer of I will go to the answer where I'm satisfied with this question, how does life live, which is will to beauty, which essentially says that um, people will engage in this moral decision making. And at the end of the normative road, I will then say, well, will to our true beauty, which essentially says, well, if you have these two insights, beauty of truth, beauty of us, it would lead to this certain cycle. Um, so if you go to this question of how does life live, the descriptive road first, um, one peculiar thing I think to note is, let me just also write it above. Let me just do it like this. One peculiar thing to notice is how important the concept of decision makings are. Decision making. I think if Steve this says something. I will go back to that. I will just finish the story, and I'll just continue. Um, I don't really understand it too much yet. Um, so essentially, if you want to rush to answer how does life live, I think it is inevitable to not talk about to talk about decision makings. If you wish, we have to as the answer this descriptive road, how do we live? Then we have to first say, well, we live by making decisions. And how do we make these decisions? So we really have to say, okay, what are even decisions? And then the question of interest for me is then how do we make moral decisions, which will then be, I would say, will the beauty. Um, so we can really build from this ground up level of decision makings to all kind of decision makings we have, from the most broad one to more specific to see what is even the meaning of a moral decision making. What do we even mean with that? So that would be like the descriptive road. And I think I would just give a quick overview of what those steps will be, what those categorizations would be. And then if we have this notion of will to beauty, understanding what it means in detail, for that we have to understand moral decision making. Then we can also go to a normative, conditional normative road where we say then, okay, we have these kind of insights, then that would lead to these rules, to that kind of behavior. So how do we go from ground up decision makings to moral decision makings? I really would say, well, we'll have to start with the most basic notion. Um, and before that, I would just wish to like also say how does formology even fit into this picture? Because now I will be going by this ground-up notion. I'll introduce a lot of concepts, and what is inevitably is that you can always ask, what do you mean with this? What do you mean with a trial, with a narrative trial, consideration trial, all these kind of different concepts, plots, etc., etc. And formology is just a means of answering those kind of questions to really get to the essence. And that really relates to also the first part where I advocate for a certain standard of meaning, a way how we should even treat meaningful talk from non-meaningful talk. Just so you know, formology is really what we get to if we really answer this "what is X" kind of questions. But I won't go. We will not go into that too now because I think that's better reserved for a different time. So how do we go? What would be like the kind of ground up steps to move to more decision makings? And I think the first major branch of decision making, the first bracket, you could call it for shortly, are decision makings that happens within a stream. But more technically speaking, those are decision makings happening without cognitive control. Without. So what are examples of these? These are essentially all kind of decision makings that you're making uh, without applying cognitive control, such as habits or certain impulses. So, for example, because what are decision makings? You could call decisions if you say, I want to reach for the cup, because essentially your brain, albeit for you, the person perhaps unaware and unconsciously, you are making a lot of decision making on how to move those joints and those rotations, etc., in the most micro way of your hand. So there are a lot of decision makings going on here, which you perhaps are not even aware of, but those you can call decision makings. So those are like a very broad class of decision makings. The same are, for example, with impulses. So when you have, for example, approach behavior or avoid behavior, you also feel that your body is moving to that source or repelled from it. And those are also a lot of micro decision makings which happen in the brain, but the cerebellum, like coordinating, etc., balance. And that really is a very broad class of kind of decision makings. They happen in a stream where you're essentially just moving along with the stream, be it out of a habit or be it out of impulse, and where you really feel like you're being floating through a stream. So that's like you could call that first bucket stream decision makings. Um, and also a big part of the stream and is more complex, which is really is about moral defaults. So we can also say, our social bonding behavior is also part of that, or our impulse not to lie or yes to lie. These are also they also affect the stream. So the stream is really layered in terms of habits, impulses, moral streams. So that's the first big bucket. If that's clear, and if perhaps it's clear, and I'm not really sure because I would like to ask then you guys can give me certain examples so I know it's really filled in, but I don't think the time allows us to go in this much interaction. So I'll just say, well, if you cannot find an example in your head, please raise your hand, and if you can, then I will continue. So I think everybody has hopefully an example. They have a feeling of what I mean. So for example, when I reach a cup, that's like a kind of decision making. That's like habitual. It's how to reach, motoric, cerebellum. So that's fine. So what's then the second bucket? The big
Maybe
bucket.
maybe I'll just add like something Jerry tells me about is he thinks a lot about like when we wake up, right? Like what's the whole procedure when we get conscious and then we start to go through a routine or whatever we do. And I think of that structured, process would be like a stream for you, right? Like that's a whole stream, right?
Um,
Is that an example?
uh, I would be saying that if you because a lot of people associate getting out of bed also with this internal struggle of fighting against this feeling of it's too cold outside. I want to go out of bed, and that's essentially cognitive control. And that's really where you see that you are having a stream which says I want to stay in bed, but there's a different rule. You have a certain goal. We'll get into that, but so that's like the second bucket. But if you want to just out of bed, where would you land in really just following the stream without having any kind of stream stoppage or stream conflict? That would just be, for example, a lot of people have this idea when you wake up, you immediately reach for your phone and just look at it, right? And then all those kind of micro scroll interactions that make you get at that phone and look at it, those are all kind of micro decision making processes happening, you could say unconsciously without awareness that lead you to looking at the phone. But then a different kind of decision making, and that indeed gets to the next bucket, is our decision making processes that require cognitive control. And that's essentially so. This bucket is also neurologically has a footprint, which is the theta waves in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. You don't have to know the neural footprint, but at least know that these categorizations are neurologically justified. And those are just decision-making processes involving cognitive control. These, for short, because it's a long word, I call trials. Why trials? Because trials are also just a process where people can be in and which you can have multiple outcomes. So these are just general trials. And we can go immediately to, there are like three interesting kind of specific kind of trials, and there's an interesting way how trials relate and how these kind of
Are they
trials
called,
interrelate.
are they called trials because they can have different outcomes? It's not,
Yes.
that's why they're called trials.
Yes, like a
Okay.
decision-making process. There's like it's a process, like a trial is a process, and a trial has different kind of outcomes. So it's like a trial because you can also like really see it when you are in bed and when you are confronted with this rule to stand up. It's also a trial because really you are now being trialed for willpower in that sense. Like, do I have enough willpower? Yes or not? So it's essentially you can really see it as a trial in that sense. It's just not that there's perhaps like a jury was going to judge you based on your outcome, but you can have that when you really think about it in an ethical sense. Um, so the second bucket are trials, cognitive decision-making processes involving cognitive control. So what kind of trials are there? And well, getting out of bed, that you can call a temptation trial. Essentially, temptation trials are you are still following a stream, but a rule conflicts with the stream. So in this case, it would be you have a certain stream which is really saying, okay, I want to stay in bed. That's like the path of least resistance. And then you are confronted with a rule which says, well, actually, you have a goal which is to move out of bed. And there's a lot of things to say about temptation trials, such as these rules, how they enter. Well, they enter, that means they are entered in the workspace, which is like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is like essentially the active subset of working memory. And there's a whole neurology about that. But essentially, what you have to get from this message is that the rule entering workspace, meaning it really conflicts with the stream because it is being sent down and projected onto the basal ganglia. I have to, at least it affects the stream. Um, that depends on nestic functions, on memory. So you really are kind of subjected to your nestic functions if this rule does or does not enter your stream. So for example, if you have this, you're like a very dirty person, you never clean up, but then you have these rules that you have to clean up after you use something. You can see that this temptation trial, which can play on a habitual level, if you think about the habitual stream, for you just to leave the messy things behind, you are really dependent on your monastic functions, whether this rule you have to clean up after you use something to enter your workspace to conflict with the stream to start this temptations trial. And so that's like, for example, so that's well, you really are dependent on that for on the monastic functions. This is like a side note then, if that's clear. But then you have like temptation trials can happen on a habitual level, can happen on a what was the best word, Pavlovian level. So really about impulses, approach behavior or avoid behavior. So for example, when you have a rule to go into a cold shower, we really have a certain avoid behavior from that, and you really have to overcome that stream that is really making you go away. You have to enforce your rule and actually change your way of to not follow the stream, really to resist the stream really and go under the cold shower. Um, so for example, also very interesting one because also this is like really interesting with trials generally. How do you make choice with trials? I would really say it's a matter of trust. So, for example, we are doing push-ups, right? We also get to a temptation trial for the mere fact that you start as push-ups with a rule. I want to hit the 30, for example, and at some point, your body starts giving you all kind of confidence signals, telling you this is bad. You should stop. You should stop. You should stop. But what is it that allows us to keep going on? We have trust. We have faith in this rule, which should exceed all these kind of confidence signals from our body. So that's really and that is how willpower is expressed, and we can even go that we can even get to a metaphysical sense later with a poem. But a lot of these trials are resolved by having trust in a certain option. Do I trust my bodily signals, or do I trust this rule? And that is the major expression of willpower generally. So that's like also a different kind of temptation trial, which happens with willpower, sorry, with push-ups, and that really says it really can see how temptation trials are the whole are the hallmark of willpower. And neurologically speaking, the trait is just dorsolateral and ventromedial prefrontal cortex coupling. So we can see that in experiments with self-control, do I not or do I eat this cookie? You can measure the kind of willpower exerted in resisting the stream really from these studies. You want to
And
say something?
this may be general for the trials, but I mean the example you gave for me brings to mind the three minds, right? So there's the mind that is the bodily signal, there's the mind that is giving the rules, let's say, the cognitive rules, and then there's a third mind that's kind of like figuring out, okay, which one is going to, it's the will, right? So the will is doing its best to figure it out. Just to kind of say something similar in different words, but
Sure,
that
sure.
connection. Thanks. Mhm.
Yeah, so that's like the temptation trial, and yeah, maybe just also generally, I spoke to the analytical route has formology as the formalization of other concepts, which really is the answer. Like, what are these trials? Sorry, what are really these temptation trials? What are these? What are those? I just drank cola as I'm burping. And what I and this maybe yeah I want to maybe step one back because I one step back because maybe it is kind of interesting to state this already. So the second part is ethics, how to live. The first part is essentially a standard for meaning, where I make a bold claim saying, this is how you talk meaningfully, this is how you talk non-meaningfully. And I have a certain standard for that, where I say the meaning of X should be can only be existent if it can be seen as equivalent to a set of field paths. So that is just a different. Essentially, I just have a criterion to say this is meaningful talk, this is non-meaningful talk, and I'm interested also when you bring up to the three minds to how that compares and how and what kind of bucket it comes. And I ask all of you to not necessarily join me on my side of the battle, where I say this is indeed meaningful talk, but to join the battle still, but perhaps at the other side, where you say this is not a useful criterion for meaning, or at the more metaphysical side, this question should, or meta side, this question shouldn't even matter. So I just wish to like also like prime you for this kind of discussion, which I believe should inevitably come. But this is to say, okay, this is what I want to say about this concept. How do you even talk about this concept? And how do you even talk meaningfully? But if that's, I just wanted to prime that, and I wish to continue then to the next kind of bucket. So we had non-trials, trials, and then we had temptation trials, and now I wish to move to a very bigger bucket, which are called consideration trials. So trials we are considering, essentially these are kind of planning trials. So while the temptation trial starts by a stream conflict, a consideration trial starts by a stream stoppage. So it really comes to this point where you think, okay, I know what I'm doing, and suddenly you don't know what you have to do, and you really have to think, okay, what am I going to do? So let's see, what would be the best one? So yeah, so generally, these things come, for example, when you have to make a choice. So I go to the left door or the right door. So a lot of time you're just walking down a path, following the stream, and then suddenly you have to make a choice, or go to the left door or the right door. For example, you have like the multi-armed bandit task, where you have like these two things, and so two bandits, for example, of different colors, and they have a certain payoff, and you just have to make a choice. Okay, what kind of choice am I going to make? And you really see, okay, you also stop, your stream stops, and you really have to make a decision which one am I going to take. So the neural footprint of consideration trials are hippocampus, ventral medial prefrontal cortex coupling, and hippocampus. Yeah, I shouldn't go too much into neurology, but what you really are doing here is you are constructing possible futures. When you are doing a consideration trial, you are saying, okay, there are certain options at play. You bookkeep them in your mind, and you're evaluating them. How are you evaluating them? Well, there's a common currency in the brain, a valuation center, which is the VMPFC, and essentially it's saying the hippocampus constructs a certain future, and that is then being evaluated in the brain, and it just gets a signal. The higher it fires, the higher the value, and you're just going about these futures. You're like sourcing them, you're sampling them to really see, okay, what is the kind of future that's at play given this option, and then you're really comparing them, and committing at the end to the one you trust and value most, and that's also like a trade-off, and that's really how. Oh yeah.
So just to jump in, we have like about 5 minutes left, and I'll ask Steph to give the concluding prayer. But you've been talking about the descriptive road, right? And you've been
Yeah.
talking about like you've given this notion of a stream, like as if life is a stream flowing, like dynamically. But then there's these things can happen. There can be conflicting streams. There can be a stoppage and choices. Are you able to kind of give us?
All right, I will go again, a quick road. Yeah, so essentially, a specific type of consideration trial is where you also embrace the aesthetic stance. So where you actually are evaluating these kind of futures, not on the basis of how well it serves your goals, but just for the story in and of itself. These are narration trials. These are a trial of stories where you are constricted to the outcomes, and you're evaluating them just on what it is for the sake of the story themselves. So is it beautiful? Because essentially, what is then beauty of a story? So a story is just nothing more than a sort of future held under the aesthetic stance. So that's also a kind of dorsolateral prefrontal cortex configuration. And then the beauty of that story is nothing more than the value in the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, given considering that kind of future, that kind of story. So that's just will to beauty. It's just really descriptive. So people engage the aesthetic stance of these futures, and that's how they navigate moral decision making. And then the normative stance, how should one live? We make use of a story rules cycle, but essentially it says that if you see the beauty of truth, which is also just a story, like it's a false, okay, a true wrong is more beautiful than a false right. If you see the beauty of that, then that would lead to the rule of doubt, which would say that you have to actively kill your ego, and that would then lead to this cycle of death of ego and rebirth by beauty. So where an ego in itself can be seen as excess commitment, and that excess commitment can be formalized using entropy, using the constraint maximum entropy, where essentially you say Because that's an interesting thing about constraint maximum entropy. It really says, okay, how much can I commit to a certain belief? Only what truth demands. And anything excess commitment is not more than it's not more that you are that truth demands it, but because you want it. And that's then the ego which comes into play. So ego can really be seen in that spotlight. So that's how so the normative part is to saying, okay, beauty of truth. Then you will have to engage a cycle of what is situation, and then there's the inquiry of situation, death of ego, and then beauty of truth, the probing of stories, and then choosing the most beautiful one. But then the second normative claim is saying if you see the beauty of us, then that would lead to the rule to care. And generally, the rules, the rule to doubt, rule to care, these are kind of the temptation trials, right? So these are like the things that the nesting functions should conflict with the stream and make you think, aha, well, I had this plan of seeing the beauty of truth that led to these rules, and now I have to obey to that. Because forgetting, the rule to doubt is if you're in a heated conversation, the ego takes place, and it's a really you really have to be reminded of that the rule to doubt before you forget it, and that's also really a nasty complication. But then the beauty of us leads to the rule to care, and that just leads to the more expanded cycle, where if in the inquiry situation, you're not only talking about, all right, what is the situation of me and my perspectives only, but you're also engaged in the perspectives of others, because the story of us is more beautiful than the story of yourself only. And that then together, those two insights, if you expand, you get an expanded cycle, you get will to our true beauty. So we go from will to beauty, that's descriptive, with these two insights, we get to will to our true beauty. And then we can talk about neurotheology, a poem, a quantum, and the physiology, etc. And we can talk about a story tree, which is really just getting insights. But that's just like a quick shortcut. Yeah.
So thank you, Montijn. This was very informative. I think, I've read your works. I read a little bit before I came here. I didn't understand, but now I think I'm starting to understand that there's these layers of implication, I guess, as they become more and more sophisticated. I think the word trial in English, there could be other more beautiful quote unquote words. Like I think of dilemma, for example, is like, or I don't know. So maybe you and I will prepare for the meeting 2 weeks from now. But one thing on my mind is how can we define our concepts more, beautifully, I guess, let's say, or truly, or particularly. So I think to try to do it in your spirit of beauty, like to say, let's each of us look at um, our languages and try to say, okay, what is it that's something that we could try to say more beautifully? What does that mean, or more precisely, or more accurately? What would we work on, right? You and I will talk about that. And then any final comments, and then maybe just simply I'll ask Steph, would you conclude with a prayer for us?
Montijn, if you have any last comments, this would
Uh,
be.
yeah, I wouldn't say to how to define our words. Indeed, the poet would agree, take the most beautiful one. For me, the analyst would say, so next to the poet, there's this standard of meaning, which I didn't advocate for. So the meaning of X is equivalent to the set of field paths, and that's how I would, as an analyst, answer that question. And that's, I think, interesting, perhaps to see where do you join the battle, when we talk about how to speak meaningfully.
Mhm. We'll continue. We'll continue. Very good. Thank you,
Yeah.
Montijn.
Well, Andrius, I see how your vision is coming together. Things are landing on me, at least. Let's say that. Montijn, you are articulating something that I feel. And while you were doing that, I had the Andrius trial kind of pop up, and I was like, "Yep, that's three minds." I was employing a U model um, that I'm gathering from Andrius's perspective in your structures, which are really well defined for me. They make a lot of sense, and a question arises. Sorry, this is all part of the prayer. A question arises that's like thank you for defining these structures for me so that I have clarity about what's happening and how it's happening and where I have a point of election on shifting will to whatever goal or aesthetic I may deem the one that I choose in my moral framework. And so thank you for making that explicit. And I'm excited to regroup in 2 weeks to revisit what Andrius is pointing us towards as Montaigne defines it.
Okay.
I'll give it back to you, Andrius. Maybe you can do us the
Okay,
same.
I'll just say, I'm just grateful that we have this culture. It's alive, and grateful like Jere has worked, with me so hard to make this happen. So to be grateful to be part of this godly vision. Thank you, Montaigne, for
Yeah, thank you guys for hearing me out and listening to your beautiful also interpretations, because that's like we have to make a story, a tree of stories, right? All the ways we can look at these things.
Mhm. Okay, so then we continue then. Peace and love.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
peace.
Thank you for watching this video. Please go to mathforwisdom.com or simply read the description to this video to learn how you can join our Math for Wisdom discussion group and our study groups. Thank you for liking this video, for subscribing to this YouTube channel, and for supporting Math for Wisdom through Patreon.
I'm a Patreon supporter for Math for Wisdom because Andrius and I have been friends for a long time, most of our lives. And the conversations I've had with him over the years have been very useful for me. And he's also a big fan, a supporter, of my work. And we have deep conversations about math and physics that have been useful for charting the course of my interests. And I'm grateful, and I want to support that, and our weekly or semi-weekly or bi-weekly conversations have been very important for me in the last couple of years, especially. So yeah, that's why I'm a supporter.